Most people are using their birth chart like a personality test. You find out you're a Scorpio rising or a Virgo moon, and that is very genuinely illuminating because it finally gives you a language for things you've always sensed about yourself but could never put into words. So then, of course, you go deeper. You get a reading, you learn your placements, you know your big 3, your big 6, whatever, your entire chart, you end up knowing like the back of your hand. But then you're still in the same place you were before. You know yourself better on paper, and you might feel like you have a better relationship with yourself, but that's not reflecting on the outside. And that's the moment worth paying attention to, because it means you've been asking your chart the right questions, but you've been stopping one question too soon. Hey everybody, welcome back. I am Dana Solara. I'm an astrologer and spiritual coach, and I specialize in self-reclamation, which is the process and path of coming back home to yourself and then living in deep alignment with your soul and its purpose. So, I want to talk today about what your birth chart is here to help you do. Now, for me, astrology is always a tool. It's a spiritual tool, and it's not the end in itself. It's a means to an end. What I mean by that is, from a high level, astrology is a way that you live a more aligned life. It is not meant to be the stopping point. So, for example, listening to a horoscope every week and then doing nothing with that information, in my opinion, is not really the intended use for astrology. It should be a tool that we use actively, purposefully, intentionally to live in deeper alignment with ourselves and the life that our soul came here to live. And when we apply that logic to the birth chart, it means that understanding your birth chart is just the first step. It's not the final step. But I see this happen a lot because people do treat their birth chart like a personality test. And I get why. It's very tempting to do so, especially at the beginning of your astrology journey, because you get high almost on the recognition that you feel when you understand something about your chart, like, wow, this is really telling me everything I need to know about myself. And you think that's all there is. And I know because this happened to me. When I first got into astrology, I've told the story many times on the channel, but for those who don't know, I was newly sober. I was in a pretty deep identity crisis. I really had no idea who I was. And I was like, I need a way to get to know myself again. I had already been in therapy. I'd already been reading books and doing all the other stuff you do when you're in this kind of situation. But I hadn't pursued a spiritual approach yet to try to solve this problem. So I thought my birth chart could help. And guess what? It did massively, to the point where I started taking my astrology studies seriously. I signed up for Nightlight Astrology's Year 1 program. I started doing readings and I became a professional astrologer. And at first, my focus was all about self-awareness. I was calling myself a self-awareness advocate because what had happened for me when I looked at my chart and got the language was so healing. But what I found out not too long after that was that wasn't the end of the story. Because at that point, I knew a lot about myself, but my life did not look that much different. I understood why I was awkward in social situations or why it was hard for me to put my ideas into words sometimes, but I didn't know what to do about that. And that's because I was only looking at my birth chart as a mirror, which I want to make it clear that is such a powerful and important use of your birth chart. I think it can absolutely be used in that way, but my argument today is we do need to go deeper if we want to truly embody the wisdom that we're getting from the birth chart. So we need to look at it not just as a mirror, but also like a compass. It's giving us some kind of direction about where we will feel most aligned, fulfilled, and lit up in our lives. Which kind of takes us to a bigger question. What even is the birth chart symbolically? If we're looking at it from a Hellenistic point of view, which is the dominant paradigm I use in my astrology practice, it shows us the natal promise, the promise of your life, the big themes that you're here to live out. And if we take that to, I don't know, more of a spiritual paradigm, it's like, here are the circumstances that your soul chose to be born into, And we can look at what drives you, what motivates you. We can look at all kinds of circumstantial information about your life. And so when we realize that's what the birth chart is, we understand that just using it as a way to type or categorize or label ourselves is so diminishing. And it's such a fraction of what your birth chart can help you do. So to explain this to you, I want to share a personal story today. And I hope that it will inspire you to take a look at your personal placements with a different lens and go a little bit deeper with them. Now, before I get into this, I want to share, in case you haven't heard yet, I'm doing a free workshop Monday, June 8th called the Soul Searcher's Map. This is a workshop where I'm going to show you my 5-step process for soul alignment using astrology and inner work in tandem, aka how you can tap your birth chart in a very specific, kind of niche way that you have not done before, alongside inner work so that you can go beyond the problem that I'm talking about today. You're not just learning stuff about your birth chart and about yourself, you're also embodying the wisdom. So if that is of interest to you, you can sign up for free at danasolara.com/map. I will put that in the show notes in the pinned comment as well. But for now, let's go deeper. I'm going to tell you this story about a placement in my chart, and I'm actually going to put my chart on the screen to show you. Okay, so we are taking a look at my chart here, and the placement I want to talk to you about is this situation right here. Mercury in Pisces conjunct the North Node in Pisces. I'm bringing this placement up specifically because when I first started studying astrology for myself to gain a deeper sense of who I was on a soul level, that stood out to me immediately. And the reason why is because of the North Node. So a little more context and detail here. I was feeling really aimless. I was feeling very confused about what I was meant to be doing in this moment. And I was looking for my purpose. That was a phrase in my mind of a problem that I had, that not only do I not know who I am, but I don't know what my purpose is, which I think those two things are very intricately connected. But at the time, I was a part of the Astrology Club. Is that what it's called? The Astrology, what is that called with the woman who, it's been so many years, I don't even know what it's called. I think it's the Astrology Club, but they have different astrologers come in every month. And Ari Moshe Wolf, who I've actually had on the channel before and is one of my favorite evolutionary astrologers, I heard him talk and I became interested because in the evolutionary paradigm, the North Node speaks to your soul growth, your soul's purpose. Now, any evolutionary astrologers out there who want to add nuance to that in the comments, be my guest. For real. That's totally sincere, because I didn't end up studying evolutionary astrology. I ended up studying Hellenistic astrology, but I know enough to know that much, kind of surface level. And so I thought, that seems important. The fact that Mercury and the North Node are so close together, that must say something about my purpose. And because I was pretty new, I really only could get surface level details that Mercury is about writing, speaking, communicating, sharing ideas. And so that was part of my purpose, was to speak and share and write and talk, use my voice. So this was, let's call it the beginning of 2021 when I started to understand this. And that was right around the time where I was like, I think I'd like to make a podcast. That sounds cool. I'm going to tell you, I sat on that idea for over a year before I actually made it real. And that's because understanding that this was a part of my soul's purpose, whether or not we want to look at the North Node from the evolutionary or the Hellenistic perspective, it didn't actually help me make moves toward doing the things that I wanted to do. Now, I will take a brief pause on the story to distinguish, because someone in the comments asked this recently, and I think it's an important thing for us to talk about. What does the North Node mean from a Hellenistic point of view? So the nodes of the moon, the North Node and the South Node, were the head and the tail of the dragon, respectively. So Rahu, the North Node, is the endless appetite, right? It just wants more and more, and it's insatiable in that way. Whereas the South Node is the tail of the dragon, so it speaks to decrease and diminishment and disembodiment in a sense. So there's a level of transcendence here, but in the Hellenistic view, the nodes are a little more edgy and they're a little more, I don't want to say dangerous because that sounds a little too loaded and a little too intense, but because the nodes are intimately connected to eclipses. And we know eclipses are fated moments where kind of flashpoints of fate can occur. So back to the fact that I had a podcast idea that I couldn't bring myself to publish. I kept studying astrology at this time, and I had started Nightlight Astrology's Year 1 program, and I began to learn a little bit about planetary dignity. So I began to understand that my Mercury in Pisces had more to say than just communication, ideas, intellect. It was also flavored by the fact that it was in Pisces in its detriment and fall. And I began to understand that meant something really specific in Pisces. I learned that Mercury in Pisces can be known as mute. That was fascinating to me because I did feel that way. In fact, it felt like a lightning bolt within me because of how deeply it resonated. I immediately called to mind many times in my life where I wanted to say something but couldn't for some reason. From being 5 years old in my bed and having sleep paralysis and wanting to scream out for my mom because I was scared, but I couldn't. I literally couldn't talk. That was freaky. To times when I was really angry and wanted to stand up for myself, but I couldn't get myself to speak, and all kinds of other things. So that nuance really added a lot of depth to this placement. But once again, that knowledge alone wasn't what got me to actually start my podcast. And that's because your birth chart is not just here to remind you of who you are. It will absolutely do that, and that is a beautiful thing. But in my humble opinion, if we want to use astrology as a tool for living a more deeply aligned, fulfilling life, instead of just knowing more about ourselves only, we've got to take it a step further. And for me, studying the South Node kind of helped me do that because my South Node is in Virgo in the 12th house. And what that tells me, if I'm using the evolutionary perspective, is this kind of organization and detail has come naturally to me. In fact, we could take it to a past life kind of interpretation, which, unless I'm mistaken, and please, evolutionary astrologers out there, correct me if I'm wrong, but we might look at the South Node as past life incarnations. We can understand something there, or at least I did about myself, that there's a part of me that's good at organizing things and being strategic. But because we're talking about the 12th house, we're talking about a place in the chart that speaks to circumstances that undermine you, that can be about self-sabotage. And so that tells me something profound immediately, which is the desire to get it right and be precise is actually often a fast track to my own demise, so to speak. It's a path to self-sabotage that I can get really in the weeds with the details, which is emphasized by the fact that the ruler of Virgo, Mercury, is in detriment and fall here. So that took me right back to Mercury and the North Node, and it prompted me to start asking a different question, shifting the question from what does Mercury conjunct the North Node say about me to what is Mercury conjunct the North Node asking me to do? Because if this chart is a map of my soul's curriculum, of what my soul came here to do and be and live through and live out, then this is not just telling me about who I am. It's not just telling me about my circumstances. It's giving me clues about the next steps to take. Now, I want to be clear about this too, because you never give away your free will to astrology, because that's where astrological anxiety can really take over your life. You can start to give all your agency and choices away to your birth chart, and that is not what I'm suggesting. I am saying that we want to take it beyond what does this say about me and say, what does this suggest about what I can do here? So when I start to look at Mercury conjunct the North Node with this reframe of what is this placement telling me I need to do, it's speak out before you're ready. Because this South Node up here is gonna keep you in analysis paralysis if you let it. Because that's a default. Again, thinking about it from the evolutionary perspective. If we think about it from the Hellenistic perspective, There's a way in which I get taken away from myself when I go into hyper mercurial mode. That's how I would read that. And that it's also got this diminishing effect that it can make me minimize and shrink myself. And that I found to be very true. That when I go into Mercury mode, I can get hypercritical. I can tear down my own ideas, stop myself before I even have a chance to begin. And it can all seem like a really good idea, when in fact, all I'm doing is keeping myself stuck. And looking at Mercury in the North Node from this angle, it's like, I do have something to say. I do want to speak, but it's not going to feel clear often. It's going to maybe feel scary. I'm going to worry that people won't understand me, and it's going to be highly intuitive. And I found that to be so true, that I get ideas, I know what I want to say, I second guess it the whole fucking time to this day. Even as I'm recording this right now, there's a part of me that's like, does this make any sense? Are people going to get this? Am I rambling? And what's crazy to me is, without fail, every video I've posted, first of all, I've never got anyone saying my worst fears, which is like, this is confusing. I don't get it. What the fuck are you talking about? It's the opposite, always. Wow, this is so clear. You're so good at explaining things. I love the way you articulated that. And so adding on that additional question of, what am I meant to do with this information, or what is my soul needing me to do in this life based on this information that I have? It's speak up, girl, and trust what's coming. Have faith in your ideas, even if they don't feel super clear, super logical. Trust your intuition and speak anyway. That's what this is telling me. Now, it is also saying, from a Hellenistic perspective, your words could get you into some trouble. And I have found that to be true. Like in 6th grade, I wrote a note saying some really not nice things about a teacher, and the teacher found the note and ripped me a new asshole over it. There's been a couple of things like that where my words have come back to bite me, and I've said more than I should have said, or burnt a bridge with my words. But that's just one manifestation of this multidimensional symbol going on here, which is true for your chart too. And I think we often forget that. And this is another reason why we should not look at our birth chart as a personality test, because it's not like a quiz in the back of a Cosmopolitan magazine where it's like, you have mostly A's, you're this. It's not just one thing. Your placements are saying so many different things about you over the course of your whole life that we would understand by looking deeper into your chart, looking into some timing techniques. We could get more nuance into that. But it's important to remember that, because, like, for me, when I recognize that this is telling me that I need to move through the fear of getting it wrong and speak out anyway, it made me wonder, am I always going to feel like this? And that's a little overwhelming. But also the realization that this was speaking to some themes that had already come up of being careful what you say, making sure you don't put things in writing you wouldn't want people to read. You can start to worry that stuff is just going to keep coming up. And what I found after living 37 years of life, I've hopefully got a lot more life to live and learning to do. But what I've discovered just in my own personal experience is these placements are going to show up in so many different ways. And also, I think once you learn certain lessons, they stop showing up in the same way, right? I learned after many mistakes to be more careful with what I put into writing. Will that lesson come up again? It could, but I'm not going to be worried about it because I feel like I've learned. And I'm less likely, therefore, to put myself in those kinds of situations again. So the placement never goes away, but the lessons evolve. The lessons change. And so if I had to take all of this kind of full circle and give you what's the takeaway here, it's that your chart is not just telling you about your character, about your psychology. It's not even just telling you about your circumstances. It's telling you about all of that, but it's also giving you clues about what to do with that information. It is a compass. It's not just a description of who you are. It's telling you, hey, here's a direction to move into, especially when it's uncomfortable. So I will say this, the quiet panic has not gone away, but it has stopped being a reason for me to wait. I still get nervous every time I publish a video. I still worry that I'm not making any sense, but I don't let that stop me anymore because I understand that I'm here to speak. And it's important for me to trust my ideas, not just because the North Node is involved here, but because Pisces is where my sun is. And Jupiter is in mutual reception with Mercury. And Jupiter's co-present with the moons. There's so many things that we could say about this, but really what I want you to take away here is the question is not who am I only. It's what is my chart asking me to do? Now, if we're looking at our birth chart, that's over the course of a lifetime. If we're looking at a solar return chart, that's over the course of this year of your life. If we're looking at your zodiacal releasing, it's what chapter are we in? What time is it, so to speak, right now? What lessons are on the table? How are we going to play our cards? And that is a completely different relationship to astrology than who am I? I think when we're desperate for answers and clarity, we come to something like astrology with just tell me what to do energy. I know I did because I was tired of feeling lost. And what I can tell you is you will stay lost if that's the kind of energy you're coming to astrology with, because what you're really needing in that moment is the confidence to trust yourself, the ability to hear what's going on in your inner world and to trust what you hear, to feel connected to your soul. Your birth chart can help you do that by asking the who am I question, first of all. That's the reconnection to your chart. But we've got to take it a step further and say, all right, what does that mean about what I need to do in this moment? What kind of circumstances am I working within right now? And how do I want to move through them with my agency intact? That is how we turn astrology into a tool for deeper alignment with our soul and living in our purpose. And when you start using your chart this way, something will shift. For me, I finally published my podcast because I understood this wasn't just telling me who I am, it's telling me what to do to some extent. And I always have a choice. I decided to publish a podcast rather than write a newsletter or start a YouTube channel, although I ended up doing those things too. I've dabbled in a lot of different ways to embody this, but I guess that's kind of the key word of this talk is astrology is a tool for embodiment. Embodying what? Your soul's purpose. And your soul's purpose is something that is active. It's something you choose to do. It's not something you arrive at. It's something you embody by living in integrity with your soul. And that's really what purpose feels like. It's not a destination you arrive at, but a direction that you keep choosing. So if that sounds interesting to you, you should come to the Soul Searchers Map. Like I said, it's Monday, June 8th at 6 p.m. Central Time. It's free. And I'm showing you my 5-step process for exactly what I just explained to you. Going from, all right, I've got a birth chart. What does it mean to doing inner work alongside birth chart self-inquiry to I know who I am. I know what my soul is here to live out and experience, and I'm actively doing it. Other than that, I hope you have a beautiful weekend, a lovely day. Drop a comment with your questions or any video suggestions for what kind of content you'd like me to make for you guys. Otherwise, I hope to see you at the Soul Searchers Map, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.